Yada for giving me this opportunity to present my master thesis topic, also on behalf of the co-authors that are listed on the right of the slide. This presentation shows the findings of a research performed in January to June 2022. With the project, me and my research team tried to find out whether decision-making models developed for challenges in modern and contemporary art conservation were useful to our field when dealing with similar challenges. In today's talk, I will be sharing the main findings of my research using the decision-making model of the Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences, named by me as the revised SBMK decision-making model, which I will talk about later, as an alternative decision-making method and relevant tool when dealing with complex book and paper objects. I will start with an outline of the project, then discuss a little bit about the history of decision-making models, talk about the case study, and then I will talk about the different steps used in the model. So the research started with a request from the Rijksmuseum Paper Conservation Department and the Rijksmuseum. The museum had recently acquired 2 objects from an artist named Boris Tellegen. The artist had donated 2 so-called blackbooks, shown on the left photo, to the museum, which are scrapbooks with black covers and blank pages that were functioning as supports for graffiti ideas and designs. In addition, the books were accompanied by a facsimile that was published by the artist himself in 2016. The conservators and curator were faced with many unknowns about the objects. What was the meaning of these books? How were they used in the past? And more importantly, how did stakeholders wish to preserve the books? Because of the complexity of the objects, it was felt a more structured approach was needed for determining a suitable conservation strategy. Therefore, we decided to use the CICS decision-making model to make a more justified decision about the conservation and restoration possible. Decision-making models have been in use since the 1990s. One of the first ones was the model showed on the left in 1993 by art historian and Rembrandt expert Ernst van de Wetering. This model acknowledged the use of values in the decision-making of conservation and restoration. From this, ideas were shared to produce a more structured decision-making model that include a more detailed value assessment. And this is why in 1999, Stichting Behoud Moderne Kunst, also known as SBMK, developed a decision-making model in which more modern aspects were included in the 7 steps flowchart. And then in 2021, the Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences, known as the CICS, revised the model from 1999. This model has 9 steps, including the context at the start of a project and an evaluation of the eventual treatment afterwards. There is also more emphasis on value assessment throughout the procedure, and, as visualized with the arrows on the right, users of the model can go back to former steps if needed. Publications showed that the CICS model had been used for 11 modern and contemporary artworks, like installations, sculptures, and paintings. However, no case studies were known in which the model was used on book and paper objects. So in order to test the model in our field, we took the 2 blackbooks of Boris Tellegen as a case study. Boris Tellegen, a Dutch graffiti artist born in 1968, started working in the 1980s in Amsterdam and also throughout Europe. Working under the names Delta and Mass, Tellegen became known in the European graffiti scene with his unique 3-dimensional lettering style and creative use of perspective. And nowadays, the artist creates multi-layered paper and wooden works and large sculptures that are displayed in exhibitions and the public space and are still visible. But during his years as a full-time graffiti artist or maker, Tellegen kept his 2 blackbooks to design and document his works. Keeping blackbooks was already a part of a graffiti tradition in America, and like Tellegen, other graffiti artists kept the blackbooks and carried them along with them on the streets. A blackbook was and is still used for multiple functions as well. As a portfolio, blackbooks were used to share ideas for graffiti designs and final works with fellow makers. And this is, for example, visible in the first blackbook shown on the left photo that has been used from 1986 to 1992. In this book, texts of other well-known artists were written on the paste down and flyleaves, including one from Keith Haring. And the second black book, shown on the right, used from 1992 to 1997, shows less text, but these are still present in the book. As visible in the case study, another function of a black book was that of a sketchbook, where the book shows the practice of different styles and letter designs before finalizing a graffiti piece on a wall. And the third and last function of a black book is that of a logbook, making it possible to collect items to keep a visual record of past graffiti works that might be removed from a wall in the near future. So all in all, it's very interesting to see the books all together and have different functions. If we look at the materials used in the case study, we can conclude that the black books can be considered as mixed media objects. If we look at the text blocks, several drawings and sketch letters in felt-tip pen, pencil and markers were directly drawn on the paper support. And both black books contain printed drawings, chromogenic photographs, stickers and t-shirt labels that are adhered to the pages with pressure-sensitive tape and rubber-based adhesives. Due to the mixed media, all the materials showed different degradation phenomena, and therefore the conservators were faced with multiple challenges common for scrapbooks, which I will talk about later. But first, after having introduced the objects of the case study, let's move to how the CICS model was applied during my research. I will discuss the results of the models used in a step-by-step manner, and you can follow the steps on the right side of the slide. So the first step of the model is called the point of departure. The context and circumstances of the project are formulated. In order to do so, the group of stakeholders needed to be selected. So in our project, the following persons were contacted: the artist or maker of the black books, because he's still alive, and he could share information on the background of the case study; the paper conservator and photo conservator of the Rijksmuseum, to gain information on the degradation of the materials and advice on risks for certain conservation methods; the curator of modern prints and drawings, to discuss wishes for future uses of the black books; and the conservation physicist from the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency, who could share more advice on decision-making in conservation and the degradation process of certain materials. And with this group, a first meeting was organized to communicate the aim of the project and to make sure that everyone was on the same page from the start. And for the black books, all the parties wished to use the objects for exhibitions, as loan objects and study objects in the reading room. The initial aim stated to use active and preventive conservation measures to slow down the degradation of the materials to make safe handling of the books possible. So in sum, the authenticity of the books in relation to the maker's intent, as well as the functionality of the objects within the museum's collections, were all seen as important from the start. In step 2, data generation and registration, the aim was to gather data on the object, maker, and other relevant aspects concerning the case study. And this information would help to gather more information about the case study and also find missing parts that we could later ask in the artist interview. So as already part of a conservator's practice, I gathered data from literature and other sources on the maker and on the historical background of the black books. And one of the rich sources, shown on the left, was a facsimile with title 8697 that was published by the artist himself. In the publication, photos of the books were included together with detailed descriptions of the artist's life. And this facsimile gave extensive information about the use of materials like pens from Hema, for example, which is known in the Netherlands, or magic markers. So by looking at different sources of information, this step of the model provided more background information about the maker's intent and the aesthetics of the books. And at this point, it is good to mention that the decision-making model did not provide any documentation method alike, while we still gathered a lot of data. And therefore, with inspirations from the NetCC's scrapbook documentation form, and one of the forms in the book Modern R2CAS, I created a draft version of a documentation form to keep all the information together in one format. So this consists of 9 pages, and it can be viewed in my thesis. During this third step, the current state of the model, the current state of the objects are examined to determine any discrepancies for the next steps. And it's a sort of condition check, so the black books were visually examined and documented. For the black book's outer boards, the marks of use immediately visible are traces of graffiti paint, which smudged the cover material during their use on the streets. And as logbooks, the black books also became very bulky. And therefore, the artist repaired the spine of the second black book with brown pressure-sensitive tape to hold the book together. But I will mainly focus on the text block risks. So for the text blocks, other risks were identified. Items in the book had partially or fully delaminated from the paper support due to the aging and fading of the tape and adhesives. The paper support is also covered with dark yellow adhesive stains throughout the books. And this observation made clear that there was a risk for losing the authenticity of the books because of the detached items and stains. In addition, 17 loose items are present in the back of the second black book that were never attached before. These items were stored at the back of the second black book to be pasted in later, but the artist never got time to do so and left them loose in the book. And this is what we identified as a risk for a dissociation of items, theft and misplacement during use in the reading room. And the third observation was the presence of chromogenic photographs, which were likely to discolor, as there were already some signs of discoloration. And this risk would create a great misunderstanding of the artist's works and change the book's authenticity. Step 4 of the model involves the determination of the so-called desired state. This means the determination of the wishes of several stakeholders for the future use of the object. And for our research project, semi-structured interviews were held live and online to identify the desired state of the case study. As already determined before, the curator of the black books wished to use the books for exhibitions and in the reading room. But as one of the main reasons of accepting the donation was that we could share it with the audience and share information about the well-known Dutch graffiti artist and give more insight into the production process of the graffiti works and the black books themselves. Therefore, the functionality of the books was seen as the most important value by this stakeholder. And the conservators stressed the importance of preserving the current state of the black books to keep the marks of use visible over time. However, it was also seen important to check with the intent of the maker to further decide how to deal with challenges like detached tape and discolored adhesive stains before carrying out any conservation or restoration. And then the historical background of the black book was further discussed with the artist himself in his own studio. As visible on the photo, the facsimile was used as a reference to the originals. An interview was also recorded with a camera and can be viewed via the Dansknal archive. Also, there's a reference in my thesis. So during this interview, Tellegen shared information about the production process and the intent of the selection of items and materials for the books. For example, it was expressed that printed items were designed on a computer but still functioned as sketches in the artist's mind. And another point of discussion was the use of tape and adhesives throughout the books. Tellegen expressed that it was never intended to have discolored tape and adhesives, but he later changed his opinion during the interview and did not mind the current look of the books. So this is still a little bit of a point of discussion. So just like the curator and conservators, Tellegen shared the wish to keep the authenticity, but also the historicity and functionality of the books intact. In step 5 of the 8 steps that we performed, the discrepancies between attributed values of the two determined states, so the current and desired state, had to be formulated, discussed, and prioritized. It is aimed to reduce any discrepancies while keeping the desired state in mind. So in our case, during another group discussion, the research team could find 3 discrepancies that were observed in the black books. The first was found for the black books for the detached items shown on the left, between the authenticity of the books and their historicity. A reattachment of the items conflicted with the historicity of the objects, while having a great risk of dissociation. So this had to be reevaluated. A second discrepancy was found for the loose items between their functionality and historicity. On the one hand, the loosely stored items gave insight into the production process of the maker. However, doing nothing would not guarantee safety in the reading room. So this use has also to be reevaluated. And the third discrepancy was found for the colored photographs between their authenticity and historicity. On the one hand, the colors were considered as integral part of the photos related to graffiti works, and considering that the black books would be a work of art, would make the color of the photographs most important. However, when considering the books as more cultural historical documents and not artworks as such, photos might also only function as carriers of information. After the value assessment, possible conservation options were listed in steps 6 and 7 to provide an overview of all the possible options for conservation and restoration, with the aim to determine options that would reduce any side effects of any conservation treatments and discrepancies and achieve the desired state as much as possible. During this step, there was a short survey conducted with 12 institutions worldwide. And with this information from the survey, together with information gathered in the previous steps, it was possible to formulate conservation options. So if you look at the first column, for the detached items, it was decided to reattach the detached items with hinges of Japanese paper and a stable adhesive on top of the older stains in order to keep the historicity intact while also contributing to the wished functionality of the books. The second column, for the loose items, in order to keep the loose items safe from dissociation, the best option was to take them out of the book and store them separately next to the black books. In this way, the functionality was prioritized over the other values. And for the other columns, another option and which worth looking into was the use of cold storage at 10 degrees Celsius to slow down the degradation of the photographs and adhesive present. In this way, the authenticity and aesthetics were kept intact as well. So as a last step, the final conservation strategy was formulated. In sum, the final strategy of the black books were, as the objects were considered to be in a museum context, so it would be both an artwork and cultural historical document, that both objects would be digitized, and further research would be carried out into the consequences of cold storage at 10 degrees Celsius for the mixed media, which could help to reduce the degradation of the photograph, tapes, and adhesive. And also minor selective treatment and monitoring would be carried out before the books would be used in the reading room. And the last step of the model evaluates the conservation strategy. But as the black books are actually treated right now for an exhibition in November, this step was left out of the discussion during our research performed last year. So this research explored an alternative way of decision-making by using the CICS decision-making model for a complex case study. Although developed for modern and contemporary artworks, the model is a relevant tool and easy to implement due to its use of values in a discussion, its clear structure, collaboration with stakeholders, and altogether this makes sort of an abstract concept like decision-making more tactile in a way. With some adaptations in the terminology and documentation method, the model will be more applicable for other specializations as well. And I would like to thank all the collaborating institutions and persons who helped me with my research. A special thanks to artist Boris Tellegen and my thesis supervisor Christina Duran Casablancas. You can download my thesis via the QR code if you want, and I would love to hear if you are using the decision-making model yourself. So please send me any findings. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mariska, for the brilliant talk on decision-making models. Are there any questions and comments?
Lisa Behrens from Linz. First of all, thank you very much for the very interesting and very applicable talk. I'm looking forward to reading your thesis. A question would be somewhat selfishly, because that's something I'm confronted with quite regularly. So you said that the objects were fully digitized, plus there's the facsimile, but it might still be used in person, so to speak, in the reading room. Is there sort of a secondary decision-making model as to who gets to see the object directly or who has to refer to the digitized versions?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think we're still looking into how much is possible actually to have the objects in the reading room, because currently they're being restored, and I think we're already faced with some problems with handling. So that is a thing for later maybe. But I think, having it digitized as well will make it applicable in that way or useful in that way. yeah, it depends whether some researchers want to see the actual object in real life. But yeah, this has to be researched, I think, a bit further as well.
Elise Jacobi. I was wondering, thank you for your excellent presentation. I was wondering how you, if the way you question the artist, your line of thought, how it influences the answers you get. And if that's incorporated in the decision-making process, because he probably never thought about all your questions before. So I think you are a big influence on his answers.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very relevant question, actually. So before we were actually setting up the interview with the artist, we already discussed with the conservator and curator the type of questions that we would ask, and I think they had to be a bit open, because that's exactly what it is, that you might ask a very subjective question or very direct one. So we try to keep it a bit open, and yeah, let's say that the artist could like fill it in for himself. But yeah, that does matter. You can try to read the transcript of the interview and see whether it's more subjective, but I think, yeah, it's always a matter of subjectivity, actually, yeah. I think a way to prevent it would maybe be, just to talk about more general topics in a way, or maybe indirect asking questions, but yeah, it's very difficult.
Catherine Lockett, Independent Paper Conservator. Thank you very much. Did you consider having the loose pieces that had just been put inside but never attached in the book? Did you just consider having them in a sleeve inside the book, like a Melanex sleeve or a paper sleeve? Because then they're still within it, but not loose.
Yeah, I think they're currently stored in a sleeve, let's say not next to the book, but in the same box. So they're still together. I think the thing is, to keep them in the book would make it still very bulky. So I think that's why it was decided to actually store them next to the book. But yeah, that is the thing, but you can still see it in the facsimile, how it looked before. So we hope that's still okay, yeah.
Frank Maury. Curious about your brown pressure-sensitive tape that he used to hold the bindings together. He obviously used that to hold something that was already starting to fall apart. And knowing how that brown pressure-sensitive tape reacts over time, it's going to fall off by itself. Mm-hmm. As a conservation decision, what have y'all come, what kind of conclusions are you going to, how will you deal with that kind of problem?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think we now mainly focus on the text block and not on the outer boards for now. But I think the Rijksmuseum is going to look into that as well. Because yeah, it's going to fall apart eventually. So we already experienced that for the first book as well, because there is no tape on the outer boards. So yeah, that would be a next project actually.
More questions and comments?
Karin Steiner, Moorburg, Vienna. Thank you for this talk, as I didn't know that the decision-making model is going to find its way here into the paper conservation community. I'm also working in the field of modern and contemporary art, so I know this model. And for example, again, this question about those artists' repairs with the brown tape, it's a perfect thing to discuss it also with the decision-making model, as we maybe tend to read it as not a proper material repair, and we have to do something about it, but actually this material also tells how the artist was working and repairing in the street maybe. So yeah. And the second thing, yes, we are influencing maybe the answers of artists when posing questions. Sorry. But we also are influencing as museum conservators when objects come in, how their further life is going to continue. So the biography is somehow changing when they are given to an institution. And so it's very important, I think, to include the makers in, and first listening to them by posing open questions, and then also getting their opinion how we should show things and take them, to the public in different ways, maybe. Thank you. So it's just a comment, and I'm happy to see, and I want to engage everyone to look at this decision-making model, and it's very helpful also if you are stuck on some point in decisions, to just go through this chart, and you will find new ideas popping up, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Yeah, I think it's very relevant because we're like always faced with decision making before any treatment. So yeah, and especially for these complex objects, it's very helpful. But yeah, you always have to involve sort of the maker's intent, even if they're maybe not alive anymore. But I think in such instances where the artist is alive, it's very useful to actually ask them and involve them in the project, because they also like to see what happens with their objects. So yeah.
Leah Michael, student at the University of Applied Sciences, Cologne. I was wondering how you balanced or ranked the artist's opinion on his own work when you had to make conservation choices.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I mean, we listen to the artist, but we still have a conservation team around us and curators as well. So we did consider his opinion as well, but I think eventually we made the actual decision, so because we are more expertise in that way. There is a thing that the model has this value assessment as step 5 that I showed to you, but it's still very difficult to actually weigh and balance the different values to another. So it really is a discussion with all the stakeholders, let's say. And that's how it actually works. So just to communicate with each other what is the most important thing, and also within your institution. So yeah, let's say, as an answer to your question, we considered his answers, of course, as also a sort of background of the case study in that way.
More questions and comments? Yeah, I was wondering whether you could talk a bit more about the limitations of this decision-making model that you realized in your research.
About the limitations, did you say? Okay. I would say because we, as a team, were not experienced with using the model, that it was maybe challenging to actually acknowledge values to the interviews and also, throughout the whole model, let's say. So that was a bit new to us. But I think whenever you're using the model again and again, you would get used to that. So, but yeah, actual limitations. I mean, it's also maybe quite general. So it's not meant to be for book and paper conservation at all. So that might be why certain terminology, for example, doesn't work or is not applicable that well. But you can change that. So.
Thank you.